"Get off my property," Lena Carter said, standing in the doorway of her father's shop with a tire iron in her hand. "Or I swear to God, I will put you in the ground next to him." Victor Hale didn't move. He just smiled the way rich men smile when they already know how the story ends. Behind her, the shop that had raised her, buried her father, and kept her alive through every miserable year of debt was about to become a battlefield neither of them could walk away from clean. Before we go further, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one and I want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all began. The shop sat on the edge of a 2-lane highway outside of town in Montana, so small that the gas station doubled as the post office. Carter's Auto Repair, the sign said, hand-painted the C, peeling at the edges because Robert Carter had painted it himself 31 years ago and never once let anyone touch it up. Lena had grown up underneath that sign. Literally, her earliest memory was lying on a creeper board, watching her father's boots move around a Ford pickup, listening to him hum some old country song under his breath while he worked. Robert Carter had been dead for 14 months. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. The kind that took a strong man and made him small in a matter of weeks. Lena had sat by his bed in that hospital in Billings and watched him disappear. And when it was over, she had come home to a shop that owed more money than it had ever made in a single year combined. She hadn't slept properly since. The bell above the shop door rang at 7:15 that morning, the same time it always did, except this time it wasn't a customer. It was Danny Ruiz, her last remaining mechanic, standing there with his cap in his hands, like a man about to deliver news at a funeral. "Lena, I gotta tell you something, and I need you to not hate me for it. Danny, if this is about the Hendricks truck, I already know the transmission's shot. It's not about the truck," he swallowed. "I got an offer, real money, full-time benefits, the whole thing. Bozeman." Lena set down the wrench in her hand very slowly, the way people set things down when they're trying not to throw them. "You're leaving. I got a kid starting school in the fall. I can't," his voice cracked. "I can't keep doing this, waiting to see if we make payroll every 2 weeks. I love this place. I loved your dad. But I got a family, Lena." She nodded because what else was there to do? She didn't cry in front of him. She never cried in front of anyone anymore. She'd used up whatever tears she had left in that hospital room 14 months ago. But when the door closed behind him and his truck pulled out of the gravel lot for the last time, she sat down on the cold concrete floor of her father's shop and put her head in her hands and allowed herself exactly 90 seconds of grief before she stood back up. Because the Hendricks transmission wasn't going to fix itself and rent on the equipment lease was due Friday. That was the first blow of the week. It would not be the last. By Wednesday, 3 of her regular suppliers had called to say almost apologetically that her account had been flagged, and going forward she'd need to pay cash up front for parts. No more 30-day terms, no more history counting for anything. Lena stared at the phone after the third call and felt something cold settle into her stomach because in 11 years of running accounts with these same 3 suppliers, nothing like this had ever happened. Not once. Not during the worst months after her father got sick. Not during the months right after he died when she was operating on fumes and grief. She dialed the first supplier back, a man named Pete who'd sold her father parts since before Lena was born. "Pete, what's going on? Talk to me straight." There was a long pause on the line, the kind of pause that told her everything before he said a word. "Lena, I can't really talk about it. Corporate made the call. Someone flagged your shop as high risk." "High risk, Pete, I have never once been late on a payment to you. Not once." "I know that, I do. But my hands are tied on this one." Another pause, quieter now, like he was covering the receiver. "Look off the record, somebody's been asking around about you. About the shop. I don't know who, but it wasn't just us who got a call." Lena's grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles went white. "Somebody's been asking around. What does that even mean, Pete?" "I don't know anything else. I'm sorry." He hung up before she could ask another question, and Lena stood in the middle of her father's shop, surrounded by tools that still smelled faintly like him, and felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her feet because she understood in that moment that this wasn't bad luck. This was a hand reaching into her life and squeezing. She thought immediately of one name. She hated that she thought of it immediately, but she did. Victor Hale. He'd come to the shop 3 weeks earlier, driving a car that probably cost more than her entire building, wearing a suit that had never once seen honest work, and he'd made her an offer for the property that on paper looked generous. $600,000 for the land, the building, everything. Enough to pay off every cent of her father's medical debt and walk away with money in the bank. She'd said no before he finished the sentence. This land has been zoned for a regional distribution hub, he'd told her, smiling that smile that never reached his eyes. It's happening whether you're part of it or not, Ms. Carter. I'm simply offering you the dignity of choosing your own exit. This isn't a business to me. This was my father's life. It's not for sale. Everything is for sale, Victor had said, standing up, straightening his cufflinks. Some people just haven't found the right price yet. She'd watched him walk out to that obscene car and drive away, and she had genuinely believed foolishly that saying no was the end of it, that a man like that would simply move on to easier land, easier people, easier fights. She had been wrong. And now, standing in her shop 3 weeks later, with a supplier's apology ringing in her ears, she understood exactly how wrong. By Thursday, 4 scheduled customers had called to cancel their appointments. 2 of them mumbled vague excuses. One woman, an elderly regular named Mrs. Petrosky, who'd been bringing her Buick to Carter's for as long as Lena could remember, actually started crying on the phone. "Lena, honey, I am so sorry. I got a call. A man said terrible things about your shop, said you were closing, said there'd been complaints, said the equipment wasn't safe anymore. I told him that wasn't true. I told him, I've trusted your daddy and now you for 20 years, but he was so insistent, and my son doesn't want me going somewhere that might not be. I'm so sorry, honey. I really am." "Mrs. Petrosky, who called you? Do you have a name?" He didn't give one, just said he was calling as a courtesy if you can believe that. Lena thanked her, hung up, and sat down in her father's old office chair, the one with the busted spring that dug into your lower back, the one he'd refused to replace for 15 years because it was, in his words, got character. She stared at the wall where his old tools still hung in outline, a habit he'd had tracing each tool's shape on the pegboard so he'd always know if something was missing. Nothing was missing from that pegboard, but everything around her was disappearing anyway. She called the bank next about the equipment line of credit her father had set up years ago, the one that had always been there as a safety net when a compressor died or a lift needed servicing. The woman on the other end of the line, polite in that scripted corporate way, informed her that the account had been frozen pending a review. "A review of what?" Lena asked, her voice rising despite her best effort to stay calm. "I have never missed a payment on that line, ever. I understand your frustration, ma'am, but I don't have visibility into the specific reason. You'd need to speak with our risk assessment department, and unfortunately their next available appointment is 3 weeks from now, let me guess." "Yes, actually, how did you know?" Lena didn't answer. She just hung up the phone and sat there in the ringing silence of an empty shop, and for the first time since her father died, she let herself say out loud to no one the thought that had been circling her mind like a vulture for days. "He's doing this. He's actually doing this." She thought about calling the police. She actually picked up the phone to do it and then stopped because what exactly would she report? That her suppliers changed payment terms, that customers canceled appointments, that a bank froze a credit line pending review. None of it was illegal. None of it would sound like anything other than an ordinary run of bad business luck to anyone who hadn't lived inside it, who hadn't felt the particular deliberate rhythm of it. 3 separate systems, 3 separate institutions, all tightening around her throat in the same 7-day window, right after she told Victor Hale no. This was not misfortune. This was a message written in a language designed to be deniable. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at her father's desk, going through invoices, bank statements, supplier contracts, looking for anything. Some paper trail, some proof, and found nothing but the growing, suffocating certainty that she was fighting an enemy who had made absolutely sure his fingerprints were nowhere to be found. The following Tuesday, she arrived at the shop before dawn the way she always did, keys in hand, travel mug of coffee steaming in the cold Montana air, and stopped dead in the gravel lot. The front door was standing open. Glass littered the ground beneath the display window, glittering under the security light like scattered ice. Her heart slammed once hard against her ribs. "Hello," she called out, immediately furious at herself for calling out at all. If someone was still inside, the last thing that she needed was to announce herself. but instinct overrode caution the way it does when the thing you are afraid of finally arrives. No one answered. She stepped inside slowly, glass crunching under her boots, and the sight in front of her made her knees nearly buckle. Her father's diagnostic machine, the expensive one, the one they'd financed 2 years ago, because without it they couldn't service anything, built after 2015, lay in pieces on the floor, its screen shattered and its wiring ripped out like entrails. The hydraulic lift in Bay 2 had been sabotaged, hoses slashed clean through. Tool chests had been tipped over. Not to steal anything, she checked immediately, frantically, and every tool, every expensive socket set, every specialty wrench was still there untouched. Scattered but present, which meant this wasn't a robbery. This was never meant to be a robbery. Spray painted across the back wall in jagged red letters still wet enough to drip were 4 words. This place will disappear. Lena stood in the wreckage of her father's life's work and could not for several long seconds make her lungs work properly. The shop was silent except for the drip, drip, drip of hydraulic fluid pooling on the concrete, and somewhere in that silence she heard her own voice come out small and shaking, saying words she didn't consciously choose. No, 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 no. She dropped to her knees next to the ruined diagnostic machine, running her hands over the shattered screen as if she could somehow will it back together through touch alone. And that was when the sob finally broke loose from somewhere deep in her chest. The one she'd been holding back since the hospital, since the funeral, since every single quiet catastrophe of the past 14 months. And she let it come because there was no one there to see her fall apart. No one there to comfort her either. She was completely, utterly alone in the wreckage. That she would later understand was the entire point of what they'd done. Not the money, not even the equipment, though it would cost nearly $40,000 to replace. The point was to make her feel exactly this small, helpless, and alone in the one place on earth that had always made her feel safe. She called the sheriff's department, and a deputy came out an hour later, took photos, filled out a report, told her in the gentle, useless tone of a man who already knew nothing would come of it, that vandalism cases in rural counties rarely got solved, especially when nothing was stolen and there were no witnesses. Any idea who'd want to do this to you, Ms. Carter? Lena looked at him for a long moment, weighing whether to say the name, whether saying it out loud to a deputy with no evidence and no leads would do anything except make her look paranoid, or worse, make whoever was behind this aware that she suspected them. No, she said finally. No idea. It was the first lie she told that week. It would not be the last, and every lie she told from that point forward would be in service of survival. The deputy left. The shop stood open and broken behind her, and Lena sat on the curb outside in the cold morning air, wrapped her arms around her knees, and for the first time allowed herself to seriously consider selling. Just taking whatever Victor Hale would still offer her, walking away, letting her father's legacy become a parking lot for some distribution center, and disappearing into a life where nobody was trying to destroy her one piece at a time. She sat there for nearly 20 minutes, turning the idea over like a stone in her palm. And then she thought about her father's hands, the permanent black creases in his knuckles that no amount of soap ever fully cleaned, the way he used to talk to the old trucks that came in like they were patients, not machines. All right, old girl, let's see what's ailing you. The way near the very end, when he could barely lift his arms, he'd made her promise, made her swear on everything she loved that she would never let the shop go. Not for money, not for anything. This place kept us alive when your mother left. He'd told her, his voice, a papery whisper in that hospital bed machines beeping around them. It'll keep you alive too if you let it. Promise me, Lena. She'd promised. She stood up off that curb, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and walked back into the wreckage of her father's shop, with her spine a little straighter than it had been 10 minutes before. You want a war, she said out loud to no one, to the empty shop, to Victor Hale, wherever he was sitting in his glass office counting his money. Then fine, you've got one. It took her 4 days and every cent of her remaining savings to get the diagnostic machine repaired, or at least patched enough to limp along. She fixed the hydraulic hoses herself, hands raw knuckles split, working 16-hour days because she couldn't afford to pay anyone else, and there was no one else left to pay anyway. She painted over the message on the wall, though she could still see the ghost of the red letters underneath if the light hit it just right, a scar that refused to fully heal. And every single Wednesday, without fail, an old man on a Harley pulled into her lot. She'd noticed him before, of course. You notice a regular, even a quiet one, even one who never said much beyond a polite nod, and a request for an oil change or a look at his brake lines. He was maybe in his late 50s, gray beard trimmed close gray hair, slicked back under a worn leather cap, forearms wrapped in faded tattoos that told stories she'd never asked him about. He wore a black sleeveless leather vest, and on the back of it, a patch white background, bold red lettering. A design she recognized but had never once commented on, because in a town this small, you learned early not to ask certain men certain questions. His name was Jack Donovan. He always paid in cash, always tipped, more than the job was worth. Always said, "Thank you kindly," in a low, unhurried voice, and always left without lingering. He came in that Wednesday, the one right after the break-in, and stopped just inside the doorway. His eyes moved slowly across the shop, the faint outline of red paint still visible under fresh white on the back wall, the new but obviously second-hand diagnostic screen, the hydraulic lift with its hastily patched hoses. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked, and something in the stillness of that looking made the hair on the back of Lena's neck rise, because it wasn't the look of a stranger noticing renovations. It was the look of a man reading a scene the way a detective reads a crime. "Rough week," he said finally. "Not a question." "You could say that." Lena tried to keep her voice light, business as usual, and failed. Jack walked further into the shop, slow and deliberate, and crouched down beside the ruined hydraulic hoses she'd patched with tape and prayer. He ran a thick, scarred finger along the cut. "This wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "Clean cut. Somebody used a blade, not wear and tear." He looked up at her, and that paint job on the back wall's fresher than the rest of that wall. Lena felt her throat tighten. "It's fine, I've got it handled." "No," Jack said, standing back up, his knees popping audibly. "You don't, not yet." He studied her for a long moment, and something behind his pale blue eyes shifted some calculation Lena couldn't fully read. "Who'd you say no to?" Her breath caught. "I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to." He almost smiled, though it didn't quite reach all the way. "I've been coming here a year, Miss Carter. I watched your daddy run this place before he got sick, God rest him. I watch things. It's a habit I never managed to break." He nodded toward the wall. "Somebody wants this shop gone bad enough to break in and not steal a single thing. That's not robbery. That's a warning shot." His voice dropped lower. "Who is it?" Lena hesitated. Every instinct she had told her to say nothing to protect herself the way she'd protected herself with the deputy to keep the danger contained to herself and no one else. But something about the stillness in this man, the quiet, unshowy weight of him, made the words come anyway, almost against her will. "Victor Hale, he wants the land. I told him no." Something moved across Jack Donovan's face, not surprise, she noted, but something closer to recognition. Like a name confirming a suspicion he had already been quietly forming. "Hale," he repeated it slowly, tasting it. "That land developer been buying up half the county the last 2 years. You know him?" "I know of him." Jack's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Man like that doesn't stop at a broken machine and some spray paint, Miss Carter. I've seen this pattern before. It only gets worse from here." Lena felt something cold slide down her spine. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment, and there was something almost gentle underneath the granite of his expression, something that made her think absurdly of the way her father used to look at her when she was small and scared of a thunderstorm. "You got a phone number for me, a direct line?" She hesitated, then gave it to him, watching him carefully as he typed it into an old flip phone with surprising dexterity for hands that looked like they'd spent a lifetime being broken and reset. "This won't stop here," he said again, quieter this time, almost to himself. "You call me, doesn't matter what time, doesn't matter what it is. Anything happens, anything, you understand me, you call this number. Mr. Donovan, I appreciate it, but I don't even really know you." "Why would you?" "Because your daddy fixed my bike for free the first month I moved to this county, back before you were even working here full-time," Jack said simply. "Said I looked like a man who needed a break more than I needed to pay full price. Never forgot that." He looked around the shop once more, at the scarred hydraulic hose, the painted-over wall, the exhausted set of Lena's shoulders. Man remembers who showed him kindness when he had nothing. "That's not something I retired from." He left without another word, the sound of his Harley fading down the highway, and Lena stood in the doorway of her shop long after he was gone, turning his words over and over in her mind. That's not something I retired from. Retired? From what, exactly? She didn't have long to wonder. 2 nights later, at just past 11, headlights swept across the front of the shop, and Lena, who had taken to sleeping on a cot in the back office because she was too afraid to leave the place unwatched, jolted awake to the sound of a car door slamming. Then another. Then a third. She crept to the window, heart hammering, and watched 3 men climb out of a black SUV in the gravel lot. Not the same men she thought, or maybe they were. It was impossible to tell in the dark, but the same unhurried, deliberate menace radiated off them, the same way it had the night the shop got destroyed. One of them carried something long wrapped in cloth down at his side. Lena's hand went immediately to her phone. She dialed the number Jack Donovan had given her with shaking fingers, and it rang only once before he picked up, alert, no trace of sleep in his voice at all, as though he'd been waiting. "Talk to me." 3 men, Lena whispered, barely audible, pressed against the wall beside the window. "Outside my shop right now. One of them's got something, I don't know what it's wrapped up. Do not go outside. Do you hear me, Lena? Do not go out that door." "I wasn't planning to," she breathed, watching one of the men approach the front entrance, testing the handle, finding it locked, stepping back to survey the building with the patient, assessing posture of a man deciding how much force a door was going to require. "I'm 15 minutes out," Jack said, and she heard faintly an engine roaring to life on his end of the line. 15 minutes, you stay put, you stay quiet, and you do not open that door for anybody but me. You understand? Jack, there's only 3 of them. Maybe you should call the sheriff instead of... "There'll be more coming behind those 3, Jack said, his voice grim and certain in a way that terrified her more than anything else had all night. "This is just the reconnaissance. 15 minutes, Lena. Stay down." The line went dead, and Lena crouched in the darkness of her father's shop, watching through a gap in the blinds as one of the 3 men outside began to unwrap the object at his side. And the moonlight caught cold metal, and every hope she'd been clinging to that this could still somehow end quietly, reasonably, without anyone truly getting hurt, began piece by piece to fall away into the dark. Somewhere out on the highway, faint but growing steadily louder, she thought she heard the low, distant thunder of a single engine. She had no way of knowing yet that it wouldn't stay single for long. The man with the wrapped object stripped away the cloth, and moonlight caught the dull gleam of a crowbar. Not a gun, and some small, useless part of Lena's brain registered relief before the rest of her caught up to the fact that a crowbar against a locked door was still a crowbar against everything she had left in the world. "Break it," one of the men said low, and the one holding the crowbar stepped toward the front entrance. Lena's fingers found the phone again, and this time she didn't call Jack. There was no time. He'd already said 15 minutes, and 15 minutes might as well have been 15 years watching that steel bar swing back. She dialed 911 instead, whispering the address, whispering, "Hurry." And the dispatcher's voice was calm in the maddening way dispatchers are trained to be calm, telling her units were on the way, telling her to stay hidden, stay quiet, stay on the line. The crowbar hit the door with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the dead quiet of the night. Lena flinched so hard she knocked her elbow against the filing cabinet behind her, and the small metallic clang seemed impossibly loud, and for one suspended terrible second, she thought they'd heard her. They hadn't. The man swung again, the door frame splintered, and then cutting through the dark, faint but unmistakable, came the sound Lena had heard growing on the phone line minutes before the low rolling growl of a motorcycle engine closing fast. The 3 men outside froze. One engine, then underneath it, layered behind it more. Not a chorus yet, not what it would become, but enough that the man with the crowbar lowered his arm and turned his head toward the highway, listening. "That ain't nothing," one of them muttered. "Just some biker passing through." But the sound didn't pass through. It grew and grew, and then a single headlight swung into the gravel lot, and Jack Donovan's Harley skidded to a stop not 30 feet from the 3 men, and Jack swung off the bike with an ease that belied his age, standing there in the dark in his leather vest with the red-lettered patch catching the security light, utterly, deliberately unafraid. "Y'all lost," Jack said, and his voice carried none of the warmth Lena had heard in it over the phone. It was flat, cold, a voice built for exactly this moment. The 3 men exchanged a look. The one holding the crowbar took a step forward, sizing Jack up, one old man alone against 3 of them, and something like a smirk crossed his face. "This ain't your business, old man. Get back on your toy and ride home." "Funny," Jack said, not moving an inch. I was about to say the same thing to you. The man with the crowbar laughed short and ugly and took another step forward, and that was when the sound behind Jack, the sound that had been building on the highway for the last several minutes, finally arrived. Headlights, not one. 6, then 10, then more pouring around the bend in a rolling wave of chrome and thunder engines, so loud the windows of the shop rattled in their frames, and the three men in the gravel lot went rigid all at once, the crowbar lowering slowly to the man's side as bike after bike after bike rolled into the lot and fanned out in a wide, silent semicircle behind Jack Donovan. Lena pressed against the wall inside, watched through the gap in the blinds with her heart slamming so hard she could feel it in her throat, and counted without meaning to 12, 15, 20 riders killing their engines one by one, until the only sound left was the settling tick of hot metal and the distant wail of a sheriff's siren finally approaching from town. "We're gonna go," the man with the crowbar said, his voice noticeably smaller now than it had been 30 seconds earlier. "Yeah," Jack agreed. "I imagine you are." They didn't run, not exactly, but they moved with the stiff, hurried dignity of men trying very hard not to look like they were running, piling back into the black SUV and reversing out of the lot so fast gravel sprayed against the shop's broken door. Jack watched them go, arms crossed, not moving until their taillights disappeared around the bend, and only then did he turn toward the shop. "Lena," he called out, gentle now, the ice gone from his voice entirely. "It's all right, you can come out." She unlocked what remained of the splintered door with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and the moment she stepped outside into the gravel lot, into the presence of 20-some riders standing quiet and watchful around their bikes, she felt something in her chest crack open, and before she could stop herself, she was crying, not the controlled 90-second grief she'd allowed herself before, but something bigger, something that had been building for 14 months and finally found a crack wide enough to escape through. Jack crossed the lot to her, and for a moment she thought he might simply stand there awkward, the way most men were awkward around a crying woman. But instead he put a steady hand on her shoulder, solid as a support beam, and said nothing at all. Just let her shake until the sheriff's cruiser pulled into the lot with its lights spinning red and blue across 24 leather vests. The deputy who climbed out, the same one from the break-in, Lena realized took one look at the scene at the splintered door at the small army of bikers standing calmly in the gravel, and visibly did not know where to begin. "Evening, deputy," Jack said easily, as though this were the most normal thing in the world. "Ms. Carter here had some visitors tonight. 3 men, black SUV, tried to force the front door with a crowbar. We got here before they finished the job." "You got here?" the deputy repeated slowly, looking around at the gathered sheet-hitters. "All of you." "Word travels," Jack said, and offered nothing further. The deputy took statements from Lena from Jack, though most of the riders had already begun quietly dispersing, engines rumbling low, as they peeled off one by one into the dark, leaving only Jack and a handful of others behind. Lena watched them go with a strange, dizzy mixture of relief and disbelief, and when the deputy finally left promising a patrol car would swing by more frequently, for the next few nights, a promise she now understood cynically wouldn't mean much, she turned to Jack Donovan standing in the wreckage of her second broken door in as many weeks. "Who are you?" she said, and it wasn't really a question anymore. "Who are you, really?" Jack looked at her for a long moment, weighing something behind his tired eyes. "Come sit down," he said. "You look like you're about to fall over, and I think it's time I told you the truth." They sat on 2 overturned crates just inside the broken doorway, the shop lit only by the single working overhead bulb, and Jack Donovan folded his scarred hands together and looked at them for a moment before he spoke. "I rode with the Hells Angels for 31 years, he said. "Not the version you see in movies. Real chapter, real brothers, real years of my life. I was national road captain for a stretch back in the 90s. Man like me, you don't just walk away clean when you get old. You don't get a pension and a gold watch. But I did step back about 8 years ago when my knees gave out and my wife got sick. Moved out here for the quiet." He glanced up at Lena. "Except quiet doesn't mean I stop watching. Old habits like I told you. Those men tonight, the riders, they're your old..." Lena struggled for the word. "Brothers? Some of them, yeah. Some of them younger chapters from 3 counties over. Word travels fast in that world, faster than you'd think, and it doesn't take much once people understand a decent man's daughter is getting squeezed by somebody with money and no conscience." He looked at her steadily. "Your daddy was a decent man, Lena. I meant what I told you. He fixed my bike for nothing when I had nothing. That's not the kind of debt a man like me forgets. Lena sat with that for a moment, turning it over. So tonight, that was just a favor for an old debt. Tonight, Jack said slowly, was a first step. Victor Hale is going to hear about this by morning if he hasn't already, and he's going to have a decision to make. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Men like him, they don't like uncertainty. They like clean equations, pressure and surrender out. Tonight, we just made the equation a lot messier for him. But messy doesn't mean over. It means he escalates or he backs off, and men like Victor Hale rarely back off. Not on the first surprise. Then what do? We build a case, Jack said. Everything that's happened to you, the suppliers, the bank, the break-in tonight, all of it needs to be documented. Dates, times, names if you have them. Men like Hale are careful, but careful men still leave trails, especially when they're moving fast and feeling untouchable. And I know somebody who might be very interested in that trail. Who? Jack was quiet for a moment, considering. Federal agent I crossed paths with a few years back. Financial Crimes Division. Man named Mason Reed. We didn't exactly meet on friendly terms, investigated one of my old associates once thoroughly fairly, even when it would have been easier to just assume the was because of the patch on his back. Respected that about him, kept his card. Jack allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Figured someday I might need it. Didn't expect it'd be for this. Lena felt something like hope flicker weakly in her chest, the first she'd allowed herself in weeks. You think he'd help? I think, Jack said, standing slowly, his knees popping again, that a man building fraud cases for a living does not turn down a lead handed to him on a silver platter, especially not one involving a developer squeezing a widow's daughter out of her daddy's shop through 5 different kinds of quiet coercion. He looked around at the broken door of the dark shop behind them. Get some sleep if you can. I'll make some calls in the morning. And Lena, he paused at the doorway, looking back at her. You did good tonight. You stayed calm, you called, you didn't try to be a hero. That's harder than it sounds for folks with your kind of stubborn. He left on his Harley into the last hours of the night, and Lena barricaded what remained of the door as best she could and sat awake on her cot until dawn, staring at the ceiling, replaying the sound of those engines rolling into the lot like a wave breaking exactly when she needed it to. Victor Hale received the news the following morning while eating breakfast on the patio of his rented lake house, and the man delivering it, a soft, nervous associate named Grady, who handled what Victor liked to call logistics, visibly struggled to find a way to phrase it that wouldn't detonate his employer's mood. They said there were a lot of them, sir, bikes, more than 20, maybe closer to 30 by the time it was over. Victor set down his coffee cup with a precision that was somehow more alarming than if he'd thrown it. Explain to me, he said very calmly, how 3 men with a crowbar and a simple task became a story about 30 bikers. One of the regulars at the shop, an old biker, comes in every Wednesday. He showed up first. Then it just multiplied. Our men said it happened fast, like someone made a call and it just spread. Victor was quiet for a long moment, just staring out at the lake, his jaw working slightly. Find out who he is, this old biker. I want a name and affiliation, everything. Already working on it, sir. And Grady. Victor's voice dropped cold and precise. No more amateur hour. No more crowbars in the middle of the night like we're teenagers vandalizing a school. If that woman has found herself protection, then we adjust. We go legal. We go financial. We go quiet and clean and completely untraceable, the way we should have from the start. He picked his coffee back up, took a slow sip, his composure fully restored, terrifyingly so. I did not get where I am by losing to a woman who fixes carburetors for a living. Find out everything about this biker, and find out what she knows. By that afternoon, Grady had a name. Jack Donovan. He reported, sliding a folder across the patio table. Retired, former road captain, Hells Angels national level going back decades. Word is he's well connected still. Even retired, the kind of retired that other members still show up for. Victor flipped open the folder, scanning the details with the flat, assessing eyes of a man calculating risk versus reward. And what's his connection to the woman? Regular customer at her shop for about a year. That's it as far as we can tell. No family connection, no romantic angle. Just loyalty, I guess. Says he owed her father a debt. Victor closed the folder slowly. Sentiment, he said almost to himself, with something like disdain. People are so predictable when it comes to sentiment. He looked up at Grady. All right, new approach. We stop touching the shop directly, no more break-ins, no more theatrics that hand her sympathy and gather her an army. We go after the paper, the permits, the insurance, the financing. We make her life legally, bureaucratically impossible instead, piece by piece, in ways no motorcycle club can ride in and fix. He allowed himself a thin smile. Let's see how many bikers show up to fight a zoning board. The zoning letter arrived 4 days later, thick with legal language informing Lena that the shop's decades-old operating permit was under review due to recently filed complaints regarding environmental compliance and structural safety, and that operations might need to be suspended pending inspection. Lena read it twice, standing in her kitchen, coffee going cold in her hand, and felt the particular familiar dread of watching an enemy adapt in real time. She called Jack immediately. They're coming at those permits now, she said, voice tight. Environmental complaints, structural safety. I've never had a single complaint filed against this shop in 31 years, Jack, not one. You wouldn't have, Jack said grimly on the other end of the line. Complaints like that don't need to be true. They just need to exist on paper long enough to trigger a review. That's the game now, no more men with crowbars. Now it's lawyers and county clerks and forms nobody reads closely enough. He paused. This is good news, actually, in a strange way. How on earth is this good news? Because paper leaves a trail a lot easier to follow than 3 guys in ski masks, Jack said. I made that call this morning. Agent Reed's flying out. Should be here by Thursday. Man doesn't waste time once his instincts start itching, and I promise you what I told him made his instincts itch plenty. Mason Reed arrived at the shop on Thursday morning in a plain gray sedan, dressed in a suit that looked deliberately unremarkable, carrying a leather satchel, and an expression of careful professional neutrality that Lena found both reassuring and slightly unnerving. Ms. Carter, he said, shaking her hand with a firm, measured grip. Agent Mason Reed, Financial Crimes. Jack's told me a fair amount about your situation. I'd like to hear the rest from you directly, if you don't mind starting from the beginning. They sat in the small back office, the same one with her father's broken spring chair, and Lena walked him through everything from Victor Hale's initial offer to the frozen credit line, the canceled appointments, the break-in, the crowbar in the night, and now the zoning letter sitting on the desk between them. Reed listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting something in a small notebook, his expression giving away nothing until she finished. Ms. Carter, I want to be direct with you because I think you've earned directness after what you've been through, he said finally. What you're describing, the suppliers, the bank, the sudden complaints, this has a pattern to it. I've seen it before more than once in cases involving aggressive land acquisition. Developers who can't buy, so they starve instead. Financially, socially, bureaucratically. It's harder to prosecute than a straightforward crime because every individual piece looks on the surface defensible. A supplier can say they simply changed policy. A bank can say a review was routine. A neighbor can file a complaint and claim it was genuine concern. So there's nothing you can do. I didn't say that. Reed leaned forward slightly. What I need is a pattern with a paper trail leading back to a single source and a timeline tight enough to make coincidence statistically absurd. That's where you come in. Every document, every email, every phone call log, every date, I need all of it. And I need you to keep documenting going forward meticulously. Because if Victor Hale is doing what I think he's doing, he's not going to stop just because we're watching. Men like him believe they're smarter than the system. That belief is usually their undoing eventually, but it takes time and it takes proof. How much time? Reed was quiet for a moment, and Lena appreciated that he didn't rush to give her false comfort. I won't lie to you, these cases can take months to build properly, sometimes longer. In the meantime, you need to survive. Keep the shop open. Keep paying what bills you can keep your head down on anything that could be used against you legally. He glanced toward Jack, who was leaning silently against the doorway, arms crossed. And it wouldn't hurt to keep your friends close. Legal protection is slow. Sometimes people just need to survive the gap in between. Jack said nothing, but something in his stance made clear exactly what kind of protection he intended to provide in that gap. The zoning inspection happened the following Monday, and the inspector, a tired-looking county employee named Harold, who clearly didn't relish the assignment, walked through the shop with a clipboard, checking boxes, occasionally glancing at Lena, with an expression that suggested he found the whole thing as absurd as she did. "I gotta be honest with you, Ms. Carter," he said quietly near the end of the walkthrough, once he was certain no one else was in earshot. "This place is cleaner and better maintained than half the shops I inspect in this county. Whoever filed this complaint either never set foot in here or is lying through their teeth. Do you have a name, whoever filed it?" Harold hesitated, glancing toward the door as though checking for eavesdroppers. "Complaint came in anonymous, which between you and me and 30 years doing this job, I've learned usually means it isn't real concern. Real concern signs its name. Anonymous complaints against small businesses right when a developer's circling. I've seen that particular pattern more than once in this county the last few years." He clicked his pen closed. "I'm going to pass this inspection clean, but I'd keep records of everything if I were you. This kind of thing tends to come back around." The inspection passed. It was a small victory, but Lena felt it land in her chest like a full breath after weeks of holding her air. And that night, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she slept 6 consecutive hours without waking in a panic. It didn't last. 2 days later, her landlord, technically herself since the property was outright owned mortgage-free, her father's one enduring financial triumph, received a letter that wasn't addressed to Lena at all, but to the county assessor's office disputing the property's tax valuation and requesting an emergency reassessment based on significant structural depreciation and code violations observed on site. Lena stared at the copy Reed forwarded, her disbelief curdling into something closer to fury. "They're trying to reassess my taxes now. After the inspection just cleared me. Different department, different process, doesn't care about the first outcome," Reed explained over the phone, his voice carrying the particular wariness of a man who'd seen bureaucratic warfare deployed this way before. "If they succeed, your property taxes could spike significantly, which puts more financial pressure on you at exactly the moment they're hoping you're already stretched thin from the supplier situation and the frozen credit line. This is insane. How is this even legal? Individually, it's all technically legal, or at least legal enough to survive a first challenge. That's what makes men like Hale so difficult to stop. They don't break laws so much as weaponize the space between them." Reed paused. "But Lena, every one of these moves, every filing, every letter, it's a data point. It's a thread. And threads pulled long enough eventually unravel the whole coat." She held onto that image, the coat, the threads, through the following 2 weeks, which passed in a blur of documentation, phone calls, and quiet, exhausted persistence. She filed a formal appeal against the tax reassessment with Reed's help, using precise language he'd coached her through late one night over the phone. She kept a folder, growing thicker by the day, of every letter, every canceled appointment, every strange phone call, dated and labeled with the meticulous discipline of a woman who understood on some deep and wary level that this folder might be the only thing standing between her and losing everything. Jack came by most days now, sometimes just to sit in the shop while she worked, sometimes to help with small repairs, always watching the road with the alert, unhurried attention of a man who'd spent 31 years learning to read danger before it arrived. Other riders came too, in smaller numbers than that first overwhelming night, but present, filling her bays with old trucks that didn't strictly need service, buying parts they didn't strictly need, leaving generous tips they insisted weren't charity. "You don't have to do this," Lena told Jack one evening, watching 2 more bikes rumble into her lot for what was ostensibly an oil change. Neither vehicle needed. "The community support, I mean. I can't keep accepting." "You're not accepting charity," Jack said simply, watching the bikes park. "You're accepting business. Every one of these men needed something done to their bike eventually. We're just making sure eventually happens now, while you need the cash flow instead of whenever they'd have gotten around to it otherwise." He glanced at her sideways. "Pride's a fine thing, Lena, but don't let it starve you while help's standing right in front of you." She didn't have a good answer for that, so she said nothing and went back to work on the oil change. That both of them understood was really something closer to a lifeline. 3 weeks after the tax reassessment letter, Reed called with something in his voice that Lena hadn't heard from him before, a note of genuine focused excitement beneath the professional calm. "I think we found something," he said. "The shell company that filed the anonymous zoning complaint took some digging, but it traces back through 2 intermediary LLCs to a holding company registered to an address in Denver. Same address, Lena, as the LLC that made the original offer on your property. Same address as 3 other property acquisitions in this county over the last 2 years, all of them following a strikingly similar pattern to yours. Sudden supplier, pressure, frozen credit, mysterious complaints right before a lowball buyout offer. Lena's pulse quickened. Other properties, a hardware store outside Bozeman, a family restaurant near Livingston, a small equipment rental company 2 counties over. All gone now, all sold under duress within the last 2 years, all eventually folded into land, now controlled directly or indirectly by Victor Hale's development company. Reed's voice hardened slightly. This isn't improvisation, Lena. This is a system. A playbook he's run successfully at least 3 times before you, which means he's confident, which means he got careless somewhere along the way because confident men always do eventually. Is it enough? Can you move on him now? Not yet, but it's the thread I needed. Give me a few more weeks, and I think we can pull hard enough to unravel the whole coat. Victor Hale, unaware of exactly how close the thread had come to his throat, grew increasingly frustrated by his own lack of progress and frustration, and a man like Victor curdled quickly into recklessness. The tax reassessment is stalled, Grady reported, standing nervously in Victor's office. And the zoning thing didn't stick either. She's got a federal agent asking questions now, apparently. Financial crimes. Victor's face went very still. Federal. That's what our contact at the county said. Agent's been in twice pulling records. Victor stood, walked to the window, stared out at the property he still didn't own, still couldn't touch, weeks after he'd assumed it would already be his. She's not supposed to have this kind of protection, he said quietly, almost to himself. A mechanic, a grease-stained widow's daughter running a dying shop in the middle of nowhere. She isn't supposed to have federal attention and a private army of bikers. What do you want to do, sir? Victor turned back, and something in his eyes had shifted the careful, calculated coldness, replaced just slightly by something more dangerous. Something personal. I want to end this, he said, completely. Before this agent finds whatever thread he's pulling. I want that shop closed, that woman gone, and I want it finished within the week. Sir, if we escalate now with a federal agent already circling, I don't care, Victor snapped, the first genuine crack of temper Grady had seen from him in months. Get the men, all of them. I want that shop shut down permanently. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever it takes, I want this finished before that agent connects a single dot back to me. Grady swallowed, nodded, and left to make the calls, and somewhere out on the highway that led toward Carter's auto repair, unaware that the ground beneath her feet had just gone from dangerous to catastrophic. Lena Carter closed up the shop for the night, locked the newly repaired door, and allowed herself for the first time in weeks to believe that the worst of it might finally be behind her. She had never been more wrong in her life, and the phone in her pocket, still and silent for now, was about to prove it. Lena had just finished locking the door when her phone buzzed once in her pocket, and she almost didn't answer it, almost let it go to voicemail because her hands were finally still after weeks of shaking. But something made her check the screen, and the name there was Mrs. Petrowski, the last person she expected to be calling at 9 at night. Mrs. Petrowski, is everything all right? Lena, honey, I don't know if this means anything, but I was driving back from my sister's, and I passed by that big empty lot off Route 9, the one behind the old grain elevator, and there were trucks, a lot of them. Men standing around, I don't know why, but it gave me a bad feeling, and I thought of you. Lena's stomach dropped straight through the floor. How many trucks, Mrs. Petrowski? I don't know, honey, 6, 8. I didn't stop to count. It felt wrong. You be careful, all right? Lena thanked her, hung up, and stood frozen in the middle of her dark shop for exactly 3 seconds before her training, 3 months now of living like this, of learning the rhythms of fear, kicked in, and she dialed Jack without another thought. They're moving, she said the second he picked up. Mrs. Petrowski saw trucks staging off Route 9. 6, 8 of them, she said. Men standing around. There was a beat of silence on the line, and when Jack spoke again, his voice had dropped into that same flat, cold register she'd heard the night of the crowbar. Route 9's 15 minutes from you. That's not a coincidence, that's a staging point. She heard him moving already, keys jangling, a door opening. Lena, listen to me very carefully. I need you to lock every door, kill the lights, and get to the back office. Do not look outside. Do not go near the windows. Jack, if they're staging, that means tonight's not a warning anymore. His voice was grim, final. That means Hale's done playing games. I'm calling everyone. Everyone, Lena, you understand me. This isn't going to be 20 bikes this time. He hung up before she could respond, and Lena stood in the dark of her father's shop with her heart hammering against her ribs so hard it hurt. And she did exactly what he told her, kill the lights. Locked the doors, retreated to the back office, and sat on the floor beneath the desk with her father's old chair pulled in front of her like a shield phone clutched in both hands, waiting. The minutes crawled. She thought about calling Reed and did her voice barely above a whisper as she explained what Mrs. Petrosky had seen what Jack had said. I'm 2 hours out, Reed said, and she could hear the frustration in his own voice, the helplessness of distance. Lena, listen to me. Do not engage. Do not try to protect the property. Physically, property can be replaced. You cannot. If this escalates the way it sounds like it might, I need you alive and unhurt to testify to everything that happens tonight. Can you do that for me? Can you just survive this and let the men outside do what they came to do? That's my father's shop, Mason. I know, and it'll still be your father's shop tomorrow if you're alive to fight for it. Please, Lena. She didn't answer him directly because some promises you can't make honestly, even when you know you should. And she hung up and sat in the dark, listening to the silence of the shop around her, feeling every creak and settle of the old building like a threat. At 11:47, she heard the first engine. Not Jack's, not the familiar rolling thunder that had saved her once already. This was different. Multiple engines heavier, the low grumble of trucks rather than bikes, and beneath it faintly voices. Low, purposeful, not sneaking this time. Not bothering to sneak at all. She risked a glance through the gap beneath the office door and saw through the front windows headlights sweeping across the gravel lot. One truck, then another parking in a loose formation that made her think with sick clarity of men who had done this kind of thing before and understood the value of controlling angles. 8 men climbed out, then from a second truck 6 more, then a third. Lena counted without wanting to, the number climbing past a dozen past 15, and somewhere in the counting, her breath started coming in short, ragged pulls that she had to consciously fight to slow down because panic would help no one, least of all her. One of the men, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying himself with the particular authority of someone in charge, walked to the center of the lot and looked up at the shop's dark windows for a long moment. And even through the glass, even in the dark, Lena felt the weight of that stare like a hand pressing down on her chest. Ms. Carter, the man called out, his voice carrying easily across the gravel. I know you're in there. My employer would like this to be simple tonight. No games, no bikers riding to the rescue. Come out, sign the papers I've got right here, and everybody goes home. Nobody has to get hurt. Lena's hand tightened around her phone until her knuckles ached. She's not answering, another voice said, and there was a low ripple of laughter, ugly and confident, from the group. She will, the first man said, one way or another. Lena, crouched in the dark of her father's office, felt something strange happen inside her chest in that moment. Not more fear, though there was plenty of that, still, but something underneath it, something that had been building for weeks now. Through every threat, every broken piece of equipment, every canceled appointment, every quiet, cowardly act of economic violence, something that tasted unmistakably like rage. She thought about calling out, about telling them exactly what she thought of Victor Hale and his 15 men and his cowardly campaign against a woman running her dead father's shop, and she might have if the phone in her hand hadn't buzzed at that exact moment with a text from Jack. 2 minutes out. Stay down. Do not come out no matter what they say. 2 minutes felt like an eternity. Outside, the man in charge, she'd later learn his name was Frank Delgado, a consultant Victor kept on retainer for precisely this kind of work, signaled to the others, and several of them began moving toward the building with tools in hand, crowbars again, but bigger this time and something that looked sickeningly like a portable angle grinder. We'll do it the hard way then, Delgado called out, almost cheerful about it. Cut the locks. Let's move. The angle grinder screamed to life against the metal of the front door. Sparks flying bright in the dark, and Lena flinched at the sound, pressing herself further back against the wall. And for one horrible suspended moment, she genuinely believed that this was it, that Jack's 2 minutes wouldn't be fast enough, that 15 men with power tools would tear through her father's door before a single motorcycle arrived to stop them. And then she heard it. Not one engine this time, not even the 20 that had come the first night. a sound like distant thunder rolling across flat prairie. In continuous building, not in a rush, but in a steady, inexorable swell that seemed to come from every direction of the highway at once. The angle grinder cut off mid-shriek. "What the hell is that?" one of the men outside muttered, and Lena, risking another glance through the gap beneath the door, saw every single man in that lot turn toward the highway, toward the sound, their earlier confidence visibly draining out of their postures like water from a cracked glass. The first headlight appeared at the bend in the road, then another. Then the horizon itself seemed to fill with them. Dozens scores more motorcycles than Lena could have imagined existed in this stretch of Montana rolling toward the shop, in a formation too disciplined to be anything but deliberate, flanking wide, cutting off the exits from the lot, hemming Delgado's men in against the shop itself with the patient, silent precision of men who had done this before, who understood exactly how to turn a battlefield without throwing a single punch. Lena lost count somewhere past 100. She would learn later the actual number was closer to 240 riders who'd come from 4 different counties, some driving over an hour the moment word reached them, because in a world that increasingly felt frayed and disconnected, there remained pockets, small, fierce, unglamorous pockets, where a call for help still meant something absolute. The bikes rolled to a stop in a vast, unbroken ring around the lot, engines idling low, and then one by one they cut out until the only sound remaining was the wind and the ragged breathing of 15 very frightened men standing in the middle of a gravel lot they had moments before believed they controlled. Jack Donovan walked his bike to the front of the formation and swung off it slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch, letting Delgado's men look around at the sheer, overwhelming scale of what had just surrounded them. "Evening," Jack said, and his voice quiet as it was carried across the entire lot in the absolute stillness. "I believe you gentlemen were just leaving." Delgado, to his credit, tried to hold his composure. "This is private business between Ms. Carter and my employer. This doesn't concern you or your—" he gestured vaguely at the surrounding riders' club. "It concerns every single one of us," Jack said, taking a slow step forward. "The moment your employer decided threatening an old man's daughter over a piece of land was an acceptable way to conduct business." He stopped a few feet from Delgado, close enough that Lena, watching now through the window with her heart in her throat, could see the flicker of genuine calculation cross Delgado's face, the sudden dawning understanding that the math of tonight had changed completely, and not in his favor. "You've got 2 choices. You get back in those trucks and drive away, and we all pretend this particular chapter of stupidity never happened. Or you don't, and we find out together exactly how patient 240 men can be." The silence that followed felt endless. Lena watched Delgado's eyes move across the ring of riders doing the math, the same math she'd done moments before. 15 against 240 tools against nothing visible but the sheer immovable presence of men who had traveled from 4 counties in the middle of the night for a woman most of them had never met. "This isn't over," Delgado said finally, but his voice had lost every trace of the confidence it carried minutes earlier. "Didn't figure it was," Jack said evenly, "but it's over for tonight." Delgado barked an order, sharp and humiliated, and his men began retreating to the trucks with none of the swagger they'd arrived with, climbing in fast. The angle grinder abandoned on the gravel where it had fallen silent, and within 90 seconds the 3 trucks were pulling out of the lot, headlights swinging wide as they hit the highway and disappeared into the dark, chased by nothing but the low watching rumble of 240 idling engines. Lena unlocked the door with hands that had finally mercifully stopped shaking and stepped out into the gravel lot to a sight she knew she would never for the rest of her life be able to fully describe to anyone who hadn't seen it. An ocean of leather and chrome stretching across her father's parking lot and out onto the shoulder of the highway in both directions, headlights still glowing in the dark. Riders standing quietly beside their bikes, watching her with the same unhurried, protective patience Jack had shown her from the very first Wednesday. She didn't cry this time. She was too stunned for tears, standing in the middle of it, turning in a slow circle to take in the sheer impossible scale of what had come for her. "Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, how many people did you even call?" "Didn't call many," Jack said, watching the last of the truck's taillights vanish. "Called 4. The other 236 made their own decision the second those 4 spread the word." He looked at her, something gentle moving beneath the granite of his expression. "That's the thing people don't understand about a brotherhood like this one, Lena. It's not about orders. Nobody commanded a single one of these men to be here tonight. They came because somebody they trust said a good man's daughter needed help, and that was reason enough. Reed's car pulled into the lot 20 minutes later, far too late to matter for the confrontation itself, but perfectly timed to see the tail end of it. Dozens of riders still lingering, unwilling to leave until they were certain the threat had truly passed. And Reed climbed out of his sedan with an expression caught somewhere between professional alarm and genuine astonishment. "I leave for 2 hours," he said, walking up to Lena and Jack, "and I come back to what looks like a small army." "Would have been useful 2 hours ago," Jack said dryly, though there was no real bite in it. "I got here as fast as I could." Reed's eyes swept across the lot, the abandoned angle grinder, the tire tracks gouged deep where the trucks had peeled out. "Tell me everything. Every detail. Names if you got them, descriptions, anything." Lena gave him what she had, Delgado's name, which one of the departing riders had actually caught on a truck's side panel logo before it fled a construction and demolition contractor registered. It would turn out to yet another shell company, 1 degree removed from Victor Hale's holding group. "This is it," Reed said quietly, almost to himself, jotting notes with quick, urgent strokes. "This is the piece I needed. Attempted forced entry witnessed by dozens tied directly to a contractor with financial links to Hale's operation. This isn't ambiguous anymore, Lena. This isn't a paper trail I have to squint at and infer. This is a crime committed tonight with witnesses." He looked up at Aguirre, and for the first time since she'd met him, something like real hope showed plainly on his careful professional face. "Give me 48 hours. I think we can move." Victor Hale received the news of the night's failure the following morning in a silence so absolute that Grady, standing in the doorway of his office, found himself wishing for the earlier temper, the earlier snapped orders, anything but this cold, unmoving quiet. 200, Victor said finally, very softly. 200 bikers in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, Montana. Closer to 240, sir, from what Delgado reported. Victor turned from the window and his face had gone the color of ash. Delgado ran. He assessed the situation and made a tactical retreat, sir, given the problem. He ran, Victor repeated, from a woman who fixes carburetors because she has a biker gang, and apparently now a federal agent following her around like a lost dog. He crossed the room slowly, deliberately, and picked up the folder Grady had brought, the one detailing the shell companies, the intermediary LLCs, all of it. "How exposed are we, Grady? Tell me honestly." Grady hesitated, and that hesitation told Victor everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. "The Denver Holding Company," Grady said finally quietly, "it's been flagged. Our contact at the county assessor's office says a federal financial crimes agent pulled the full ownership chain 2 weeks ago. He's been cross-referencing it against the other properties. The restaurant, the hardware store, the rental company." Victor closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, something had shifted behind them. Not panic, not yet. Victor Hale was not built for panic, but something colder and more calculating had replaced the earlier fury. "Liquidate," he said, "every shell company tied to that Denver address. Move whatever assets can be moved before any freeze order comes through, and get me the best defense attorney in this state today, not next week." "Sir, if we liquidate now, doesn't that look like—" "It looks like nothing if it's done correctly," Victor snapped, the composure cracking just slightly. "I did not build this empire by waiting around for federal agents to catch up to me. We move faster than they do. We always have." He looked out at the lake again, at the property he'd never managed to secure, and something almost like genuine hatred crossed his face. That woman, that shop, it was supposed to be simple. It was supposed to be a formality. "What do you want to do about her now, sir?" Victor was quiet for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice had gone very soft, very careful. The voice Grady would later think of a man who had finally truly run out of patience. "Nothing legal is working. Nothing subtle is working." He turned back to Grady. "I want everything we have on that agent. Reed, his caseload, his personal life, anything that could compromise his credibility or slow him down through official channels. And I want a lawyer drafting a defamation and harassment countersuit against Carter tonight, alleging she's colluded with a criminal motorcycle organization to intimidate and assault my representatives. If I can't win this quietly, I'll win it loudly in court, where I have every advantage money can buy." The countersuit landed on Lena's doorstep 4 days later, delivered by a process server who wore the apologetic, uncomfortable expression of a man who knew exactly how thin the case he was serving actually was. Lena stood in her kitchen reading through pages of dense legal language, accusing her of conspiring with a known criminal organization to commit assault and property damage against Victor Hale's employees, and felt something in her chest cave in that all the previous weeks of pressure hadn't managed to touch. She called Reed immediately, her voice shaking in a way it hadn't during the trucks, during the crowbar, during any of the physical danger she'd survived so far. "He's suing me, Mason. He's twisting it like I attacked them. Like Jack and everyone who came to protect me are the criminals." "I saw it," Reed said grimly. "It's a desperation move, Lena. A distraction, and honestly a fairly weak one. The timeline alone destroys it, since your supplier started retaliating and your credit line froze weeks before you'd even met Jack Donovan. This isn't a case that survives real scrutiny, but I won't lie to you, it can drag things out. It can cost you money you don't have on a lawyer you'll need to hire. And that's exactly the point of it. He's not trying to win this suit. He's trying to bleed you until you can't keep fighting. I don't have money for a lawyer, Mason. I barely have money for parts." There was a pause on the line, and when Reed spoke again, his voice carried something careful, something that sounded almost like an apology for what he was about to say. "Then let me make a call. There's people who specialize in exactly this, attorneys who take cases like yours or pro bono specifically because they recognize a slap suit when they see one. That's what this is legally speaking. A strategic lawsuit designed purely to intimidate and drain resources, not because he genuinely believes he'll win. Courts don't look kindly on that once they see the pattern clearly, and I intend to make sure they see it clearly." The attorney Reed connected her with a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Alvarez, who'd built a career out of representing small business owners against exactly this kind of corporate intimidation called Lena, that same evening. "Ms. Carter, I read through what your agent friends sent me, and I want you to hear this clearly because I know you're scared and I know you're exhausted," Patricia said, her voice steady and direct, in a way that Lena found immediately deeply reassuring. "This lawsuit is garbage, not legally sophisticated garbage, obvious, transparent, desperate garbage, filed by a man who is watching a federal investigation close in on him and is throwing anything he can find at the wall to slow it down. We are going to file a motion to dismiss, and we are going to win. And more importantly, every filing in this countersuit becomes part of the public record, which means every lie he tells under oath about you becomes something Agent Reed can use against him later. He thinks he's attacking you. He's actually just handing the prosecution more rope." Lena felt for the first time in what seemed like a very long time, something like the ground steadying slightly beneath her feet. "Thank you," she said quietly. I don't know how to thank any of you people. Jack, you Mason. I was completely alone 3 months ago." "You're not alone now," Patricia said simply. "And for what it's worth, Ms. Carter, I've read a lot of files in my career. Men like Victor Hale usually get away with this because the people they target give up before help arrives. You didn't. That matters more than you know." The days that followed fell into a strange, tense rhythm, Lena running the shop during daylight hours with Jack, or one of the other riders, almost always present now, no longer even bothering to pretend they needed service, simply sitting in lawn chairs near the bay doors like sentries, while Patricia fought the countersuit through a rapid series of filings, and Reed quietly, methodically continued building his case against the tangled web of shell companies leading back to Victor Hale. The break came on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after the trucks. When Reed called Lena, before the shop had even opened, his voice carrying an urgency she'd never heard from him before. "We got a warrant," he said, "this morning. Financial records, property records, communications, everything tied to Hale's development company, and every shell entity linked to it. My team's executing it as we speak." Lena sat down hard on the edge of her father's desk. "It's really happening. It's really happening. And Lena, I need to tell you something else. Something we found in the process of building the warrant application. Delgado, the contractor who ran that night, turns out he wasn't as loyal as Hale assumed. Once he understood the scope of exposure he was facing personally for the attempted break-in, he agreed to cooperate. Fully. He's given us records of every job Hale hired him for over the past 2 years, including the original break-in at your shop, the sabotage of your equipment, all of it directly tied back to instructions from Hale's office." Lena felt tears she hadn't expected pricking at her eyes. Not from fear this time, but from something that felt dangerously, cautiously close to relief. So it's over. It's not over yet, Reed cautioned, gentle but firm. There's still a long road indictment trial. All of it takes time, and men with Hale's resources don't go down easy or fast. But Lena, listen to me. The evidence is real now. It's not circumstantial anymore. Its testimony records a clear trail from his office to your shop's front door. This is the beginning of the end for him, even if it doesn't feel like an ending yet. She thanked him, hung up and sat alone for a long moment in the quiet of her father's shop, looking around at the space that had nearly been taken from her a dozen different ways over the past 3 months, the diagnostic machine repaired and humming steadily now. The hydraulic lift hoses replaced in solid. The wall where red paint had once spelled out a threat painted over so thoroughly now that you'd never know, unless you already knew to look, that anything had ever been wrong there at all. Jack arrived an hour later for his usual watch, and Lena met him at the door with the news before he'd even parked his bike. They executed a warrant, Jack. Delgado's cooperating. They've got him linked to everything: the break-in, the sabotage, the trucks. Jack's weathered face broke into something Lena had never seen from him before. Not quite a full smile. Jack didn't seem built for full smiles, but something warm and satisfied, moving behind his tired eyes. Your daddy would be proud of you, he said. Not for surviving this. Anybody can survive if they're lucky. He'd be proud you never once gave that man the satisfaction of watching you fold. Lena felt her throat tighten. I almost did, Jack. That night after the break-in, sitting on the curb, I almost called Hale back and told him to name his price. But you didn't. No, I thought about my dad's hands, about this place keeping us alive. She looked around the shop at every hard-won piece of it. I couldn't let it go, not even when it would have been easier. That's the thing about people who inherit something worth fighting for, Jack said quietly. Easier was never really on the table. Not for folks like you. They stood together in the doorway of Carter's Auto Repair, watching the empty highway stretch out toward town, and neither of them could have known yet just how close Victor Hale's entire empire now stood to collapsing, nor how far he was willing to go in these final desperate days before the walls finally closed in around him completely. Victor Hale learned about the warrant the same way he learned about most things now, too late and from someone else's mouth instead of his own control. His attorney called him at 6 a.m, voice clipped and tight in a way that told Victor everything before the man said a single sentence of substance. They hit 3 properties overnight: your office in Bozeman, the record storage facility, and the Denver holding company address. They've got everything, Victor. Financials, emails, correspondence with Delgado going back 2 years. Victor stood very still in his kitchen, phone pressed hard against his ear, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, not since he was young and hungry and one bad deal away from losing everything. Fear. Delgado, he said slowly. He's talking. He's more than talking. He's got documentation, text messages, a recorded call apparently from the night of the confrontation at the Carter property, where someone from your office gave him explicit instruction to, and I'm quoting the warrant application here, ensure the shop does not reopen under Carter ownership. Victor closed his eyes. Grady. It had to have been Grady Sloppy on a phone line he'd assumed was secure, and the fury that rose in him in that moment was so total, so consuming, that for several seconds he couldn't speak at all. What's my exposure? He finally managed. Significant. Fraud, coercion, conspiracy, potentially racketeering, if they can establish the pattern across the other properties, the restaurant, the hardware store, the rental company. If even half of what's in that warrant application holds up, Victor, you are not looking at a fine and a strongly worded letter. You are looking at years. Victor hung up without saying goodbye, walked to his window, and looked out at the lake he'd rented this house, specifically to look out at the water flat and gray, under a sky that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to rain, and felt for the first time since he'd started building his empire, 15 years earlier, the specific vertigo of watching something enormous begin to fall. He did not, however, do what a smarter, more disciplined man might have done, which was call his attorney back and begin the slow, careful work of damage control, of cooperation, of trying to salvage what could still be salvaged through legal channels. Instead, Victor Hale picked up a different phone, one that wasn't registered to him at all. I need this finished, he said the moment the call connected. Tonight, whatever it costs. The voice on the other end was quiet, careful. Finished how? Victor was silent for a long moment, staring out at the gray water, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone flat and cold, in a way that would have terrified anyone who knew him well enough to recognize it as the sound of a man who had stopped calculating consequences entirely, however it needs to be. Lena didn't know any of this yet. She spent that morning doing something she hadn't done in months, actual ordinary work, the ordinary blessed drudgery of an oil change and a brake inspection on Mrs. Petrosky's Buick. The older woman sitting in a folding chair by the bay doors, chatting cheerfully about her grandson's baseball season, while Lena worked, and for nearly 2 hours, Lena felt something close to normal again. It didn't last. Jack arrived a little after noon, and the moment Lena saw his face, she knew something had shifted. "Reed called me," he said low, glancing toward Mrs. Petrosky to make sure she was out of earshot. "Delgado's cooperating fully now, formal statement and everything. Reed thinks it's enough to move on Hale directly within days, maybe sooner." Relief flooded through Lena so fast it made her briefly lightheaded. "Days. Jack, that means Hale knows he's cornered," Jack cut in, and the grim set of his jaw told her he hadn't come here to celebrate. "Cornered men do one of two things, Lena. They surrender or they get reckless. I don't like betting on which one a man like Hale picks, not when everything he's built is about to collapse in front of him." Lena's relief curdled instantly back into the familiar, exhausting dread that had lived in her chest for 3 months now. "You think he's going to do something? I think you should stay somewhere else tonight. My place or with one of the others. Not here. Jack, I can't just abandon the shop every time. I'm not asking you to abandon it. I'm asking you to be smart for one night while the walls close in on a desperate man." Jack's voice softened slightly, but the urgency underneath it didn't. "You've survived a break-in and 15 men with an angle grinder. You did it right both times because you stayed calm and you called for help before you needed it, not after. I'm asking you to do the same thing now, please." Something in the way he said, "Please, Jack Donovan," who Lena had never once heard sound uncertain about anything, made the hair on her arms rise. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I'll stay with you tonight." But the shop still needed closing, still needed the register counted and the bay doors locked, and Lena told herself there was time for that, at least a few ordinary hours before ordinary caution took over, and she sent Jack on ahead to make arrangements while she finished Mrs. Petrosky's Buick and closed up for the evening exactly the way she had 1,000 evenings before. She didn't know locking that front door at 6:30 with the sun going orange behind the mountains that Victor Hale's men were already less than an hour out, and that this particular ordinary evening was about to become the most dangerous night of her entire life. The first sign something was wrong came at 8:40, not from outside the shop, but from Lena's phone buzzing with a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Your friend Jack ran into some trouble on his way to town. You should come see about that before you go anywhere else tonight." Lena's blood went to ice. She called Jack immediately. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, something that had never once happened in 3 months of Jack answering on the first ring day or night without fail. She called again. Voicemail. Her hands shaking, she dialed Reed next, her voice climbing toward panic before he'd even fully answered. "Mason, I got a text. Someone said Jack's in trouble, and he's not answering his phone. He never doesn't answer his phone." "Lena, slow down. Read me the text exactly." She read it to him, and she heard him exhale sharp and controlled the sound of a professional, forcing himself not to panic, even as every instinct screamed too. "That's not a coincidence text. That's bait, Lena. Somebody wants you to leave wherever you are and go looking for him." Reed's voice hardened. "I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not go looking for Jack. I'm calling local PD to do a welfare check on his address right now, and I'm 15 minutes from you myself. Stay in the shop, lock everything, and do not open that door for anyone but me. Do you understand? Mason, if something happened to him because of me, nothing has happened yet that we know of. Stay put." The line went dead as he presumably started making calls, and Lena stood in the dark shop phone clutched so hard her fingers ached, torn between Reed's instruction and the raw animal need to do something, anything, to find out if the man who'd saved her life twice now was hurt because of her. She tried Jack's phone one more time. This time it didn't even ring straight to voicemail, the mailbox suddenly impossibly full. That was when she heard the sound outside. Not an engine. Footsteps careful and deliberate crunching across gravel. Lena's entire body went rigid. She backed away from the window, slowly retreating toward the back office the way Jack had taught her. And it was in that retreat, in the sliver of streetlight cutting through the front blinds, that she saw the silhouette pass across the window, one man, then a second, moving with the unhurried confidence of people who believed the building was empty. Her phone, still clutched in her hand, buzzed again. Reed. PD checked Jack's place. He's not there, no signs of struggle. Might be nothing. Stay locked up regardless. Lena's relief at Jack possibly being safe collided violently with the fresh terror of the footsteps outside, and she crouched lower behind her father's desk phone, screen dimmed against her palm, and typed with trembling thumbs. Men outside the shop right now. Not Jack. At least two, maybe more. The reply came instantly. Do not make a sound. I'm 8 minutes out. Calling back up now. 8 minutes. Lena had learned over 3 brutal months exactly how long 8 minutes could feel when danger was already inside the walls with you. And she pressed herself into the corner of the office behind the same overturned filing cabinet that had barely protected her once before, and listened to the front door handle rattle, testing, and then go still. A different sound followed, softer, more careful than the crowbar or the angle grinder from before. A lockpick maybe, or something similarly quiet. And Lena understood in a cold rush that whoever Hale had sent this time was not interested in a loud theatrical show of force. This time they wanted to be quiet. This time they wanted to get in and get out without 200 motorcycles arriving to stop them. The front door lock clicked open. Lena's heart slammed so hard against her ribs she thought it might actually be audible from across the room, and she pressed her hand over her own mouth, forcing her breathing into silence, listening to 2 sets of footsteps move slowly, methodically through the darkened shop, moving toward the back office with the unhurried patience of men who believed they had all the time in the world. She's got to be in here somewhere, one voice muttered low. Truck's still out back. Check the office. Lena's blood turned to ice water. There was nowhere left to retreat to. The office had 1 door, 1 window too small to fit through, and 2 men were walking directly toward it with the calm, terrible confidence of professionals. She thought in that suspended, terrified second of every version of herself who had gotten her to this exact moment, the girl who'd grown up on this shop floor, the daughter who'd promised her dying father she'd never let it go, the woman who'd stood in a doorway 3 months ago with a tire iron and told Victor Hale to get off her property. She thought of Jack's voice telling her that people who inherit something worth fighting for don't get the luxury of easy. She grabbed the heaviest thing within reach, a torque wrench her father had used for 30 years, its handle worn smooth from his grip, and held it low at her side and waited. The office door swung open. The beam of a flashlight swept across the room and landed directly on her, and for one frozen electric second, nobody moved at all. Found her, the man said, and took a step forward. And that was the exact moment the front of the shop exploded with sound and light headlights, flooding through every window at once, the roar of engines, so sudden and overwhelming that both men in the doorway spun toward it in pure, startled reflex. Not Jack's usual measured approach. This was different, fast, urgent, dozens of engines converging on the property in what felt like seconds rather than minutes, and underneath it, cutting through everything, a voice Lena would have known anywhere, roaring across the lot, with a fury she'd never once heard from him in 3 months of quiet, watchful calm. Get away from her, Jack. Alive. Furious. Already off his bike and moving toward the shop with a speed that defied every one of his 60-some years, and behind him, spilling out of the dark in every direction, more riders than Lena could count, more even than the night of the trucks, converging on the shop from what felt like every direction at once. The 2 men in the office doorway exchanged one panicked look and bolted not toward Lena, but away, shoving past each other in their scramble to escape through the back, and Lena, shaking so violently she could barely stand, heard the sound of a scuffle outside, shouting, and then abruptly sirens, real ones this time, multiple units closing fast. She staggered out of the office into the shop floor just as Jack burst through the front door, and the look on his face when he saw her standing there alive, unharmed, torque wrench still gripped in her white-knuckled hand, broke something open in his usually granite composure that Lena had never seen before. Lena. His voice cracked on her name. Lena, thank God. You didn't answer your phone, she said, and burst into tears before she could stop herself, the wrench clattering to the floor as she pressed both hands over her face. I called and called. I thought Jack. I thought something happened to you. They ambushed at my bike a mile out of town, Jack said grimly, crossing the room to her, one steady hand landing on her shoulder the way it had the very first terrible night. Cut me off where the truck tried to run me off the road. Wasn't subtle about it either, clearly meant to keep me away from here tonight, keep me occupied while somebody else came for you directly. His jaw tightened with fury, barely leashed. I got clear, called every man I know, and rode here faster than I've ridden in 20 years. I am so sorry it took as long as it did. Reed arrived less than a minute behind the siren's badge, already out taking in the scene with the fast, controlled assessment of a man who'd trained for exactly this kind of chaos. Lena shaking but unharmed, Jack furious, but steady beside her deputies already cuffing two men who'd been caught trying to flee through the back lot cornered by a wall of riders who had, without a single order given, simply formed a perimeter around the entire property the moment they arrived. Ms. Carter, Reed's voice was gentler than Lena had ever heard it. Are you hurt anywhere at all? No, I'm okay. Her voice shook as she said it, and she wasn't entirely sure it was true, but her body was unmarked, and in that moment, that felt like enough of a miracle to claim. Reed turned to the deputies processing the two captured men. I want full statements from both of them tonight, and I want to know exactly who sent them and what their instructions were the second you've got anything. He looked back at Lena. This is it. This is attempted kidnapping, or worse, executed the same night I served a warrant tied directly to his operation. There is no version of events where Victor Hale survives this legally. None. The two men caught fleeing the property low-level muscle. It would turn out hired through yet another intermediary. Careful enough that neither of them had ever spoken to Victor directly, broke within hours under the combined weight of the federal warrant already executed against Hale's operation, and the very real prospect of facing kidnapping charges alone if they didn't cooperate. By 2 a.m, Reed had what he needed, a recorded instruction relayed through two intermediaries, but ultimately traceable back to a burner phone purchased sloppily on a corporate card belonging to one of Hale's shell companies. An instruction to handle the Carter situation permanently tonight before this window closes. He panicked, Reed told Lena and Jack sitting in the shop's small office at nearly 3 a.m, exhaustion and adrenaline both etched deep into his face. The warrant spooked him badly enough that he stopped thinking like a careful man and started thinking like a desperate one. Desperate men make mistakes. This is the mistake that ends him. What happens now? Lena asked, her voice hoarse from hours of tears and terror both. Now I have more than enough to request an arrest warrant, not just a search warrant. I'll have it by morning. I'd bet everything I own on it. Attempted kidnapping tied directly to a financial crimes conspiracy is not a case any prosecutor lets sit on a desk. Reed looked at her steadily. You survived the worst of it tonight, Lena. I know that's cold comfort right now, sitting here shaking with a torque wrench story you're going to be telling for the rest of your life. But I need you to hear this clearly after tonight, Victor. Hale does not walk away from this. Not with money, not with lawyers, not with anything. Tonight is the night this actually ends. Jack, sitting beside her, hadn't said much since the chaos settled his usual composure, returning slowly piece by piece, but his hand had found hers at some point in the last hour and hadn't let go. And when Reed finished speaking, Jack looked at Lena with something raw and unguarded in his weathered face. I should have been here sooner, he said quietly. I keep thinking about those 2 minutes between when they got in and when we got here. I keep thinking about what could have... You got here, Lena said, cutting him off gently, her own hand tightening around his. That's what matters, Jack. You got here, and you brought half the county with you, and I am standing here right now because of that. Don't you dare carry guilt for the 2 minutes when you gave me everything else. Jack was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim light of the office, and something passed between them that neither one fully named out loud, but that Lena would carry with her. Long after that night, a recognition quiet and profound of exactly what this man had risked again and again for a woman who'd been a stranger to him a year earlier, simply because her father had once shown him a kindness he'd never forgotten. Your daddy, Jack said, finally, his voice thick, would have ridden through hell itself for the people he loved. I just did what I figure he'd have wanted somebody to do for you since he couldn't be here to do it himself. Lena's eyes filled again, but this time the tears came softer, gentler. Grief and gratitude tangled together into something that didn't quite have a name. Victor Hale was arrested 4 days later. Not in some dramatic scene of federal agents storming his lake house at dawn, but quietly, almost anticlimactically, as he stepped out of a black car outside his attorney's office downtown, two agents flanking him with the flat procedural calm of men who had done this many times before. He didn't resist. He didn't say anything at all, in fact, beyond a single furious glance toward the small crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk. Word travels fast in a state this size, especially about a man. This prominent, a crowd that included standing quietly near the back. Lena Carter herself, arms crossed, watching in a silence that held more weight than any words could have carried. Victor's eyes found hers for just a moment as the agents guided him toward the car. Something passed across his face, not remorse, Lena would tell people. Later, she never once saw a remorse in that man's eyes, not even then. Something closer to disbelief. The particular wounded disbelief of a man who had genuinely never imagined that a woman who fixed carburetors for a living could be the thing that finally brought him down. He didn't say a word to her. He didn't need to. The car door closed and Victor Hale disappeared into it, and the empire he'd spent 15 years building around quiet coercion and careful cruelty began, in that exact moment, its final and complete collapse. Reed found Lena in the dispersing crowd afterward, his expression carrying the particular satisfaction of a man who chased something difficult for a long time and finally caught it. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, and we're still building the racketeering case around the pattern across all 4 properties, he told her. His attorneys will fight, obviously they always do. But Lena, I've built cases for 11 years. I have never seen one this thoroughly documented, this cleanly connected from the first supplier phone call all the way through to 2 men standing in your office with a flashlight in your face. Every single piece you gave me, every date, every folder it built, the exact case that put him in that car today. It doesn't feel like it's really over, Lena admitted, watching the last of the crowd disperse the street, slowly emptying back into ordinary small-town rhythm. It feels like I should be more, I don't know, happy, relieved, something more than this. Give it time, Reed said gently. You've been living inside a war for 3 months, Lena. Peace doesn't always announce itself the moment it arrives. Sometimes it just quietly starts and you don't fully believe it until you've lived in it a while. Jack was waiting for her by his bike at the edge of the lot, and when she walked over, he studied her face carefully, reading the way he always seemed able to, exactly what was sitting underneath her expression. Don't feel real yet, he said. Not a question. No, Lena admitted. It doesn't. It will. Jack swung a leg over his bike, settling into the familiar posture Lena had come to associate over these past strange and violent months with safety itself. Give it a few weeks of nobody trying to burn your shop down or run me off the road, and I promise you it'll start feeling real. Ordinary has a way of sneaking back in once the danger actually clears. Lena looked back toward the courthouse, toward the space where Victor Hale's car had disappeared minutes earlier, and felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight for so long she'd nearly forgotten what its absence might feel like. Come by the shop tomorrow, she said. Oil change on the house. Least I can do for the man who rode through hell twice for me. Jack's weathered face cracked finally into that rare full smile she'd only glimpsed once or twice before. And for the first time in 3 exhausting, terrifying months, Lena Carter walked away from a confrontation with Victor Hale's world, feeling something that wasn't fear at all. She still didn't know, walking to her truck under a sky finally blessedly quiet, just how far the consequences of that arrest would ripple outward in the weeks to come. How many other families, other small shops, other quiet victims of Victor Hale's 15-year pattern of predation would finally at long last get the chance to tell their own stories too. The ripples started small, the way most true things do, with a single phone call that came into the shop 11 days after Victor Hale's arrest. Ms. Carter, my name's Diane Whitfield. I ran Whitfield's Hardware outside Bozeman until about 18 months ago when I lost it. I saw your name in the paper, saw what happened to you, and I had to call. What happened to me was exactly the same thing. Suppliers, then the bank, then somebody broke in and smashed half my inventory. I always thought it was just bad luck. Just a run of terrible luck that finally broke me. Lena sat down slowly at her father's desk, the phone pressed hard to her ear, feeling something cold and furious settle over her that she hadn't fully felt even in the worst nights of her own ordeal. The specific compounding horror of learning she hadn't been alone, after all, that a stranger 3 counties over had endured the exact same quiet war and lost. It wasn't bad luck, Lena said quietly. It was Victor Hale. And I think you need to call an agent named Mason Reed today, not tomorrow. Today. Diane Whitfield called Reed within the hour. By the end of the week, 2 more calls had come in the family who'd run the restaurant near Livingston, and the owner of the equipment rental company, 2 counties over, both of them, describing with the particular exhausted precision of people finally being believed after months or years of doubting their own sanity, the identical pattern. Suppliers, banks, break-ins, rumors. A lowball offer arriving right on schedule once the target was sufficiently broken. Reed drove out to the shop himself to deliver the news in person, and Lena watched something in his usually contained professional demeanor crack open into genuine unguarded satisfaction as he laid it out for her. 3 additional victims, all willing to testify, all with documentation eerily similar to what you built for us. Combined with Delgado's cooperation and what we recovered from the warrant, the U.S. Attorney's Office isn't just pursuing fraud and coercion charges anymore, Lena. They're pursuing this as an organized racketeering case. 15 years of this pattern repeated at least 4 times that we can prove, and possibly more we haven't found yet. He shook his head slowly, something like awe in his voice. You didn't just save your own shop. You handed us the thread that's about to unravel every single thing that man has ever built. What happens to him now? Now the case gets big enough that Hale's own attorneys start looking for a deal instead of a trial because juries do not forgive men who terrorize 4 different small business owners across 15 years for profit. My guess, and I've been doing this a long time, he pleads, out eventually tries to minimize the sentence and still ends up with more years than he ever imagined possible, standing in that glass office of his, looking out at land he thought was already his. Lena sat with that for a long moment, looking around the shop, the diagnostic machine humming steady in the corner, the hydraulic lift solid and silent, the wall painted clean, where a thread had once dripped in red, and felt something that had been coiled tight in her chest since the day her father died, begin finally slowly to loosen. Diane Whitfield, she said, the hardware store owner. Is there any way she gets her business back? Any of them? Restitution's part of what the prosecutors are pursuing, yes. It won't undo 18 months of a woman's life, but it's something. More than she had a month ago, that's for certain. Reed studied her carefully. You could have kept all of this to yourself, you know. Focused on your own case, your own recovery, let the chips fall wherever they fell for anyone else Hale had hurt. Instead, you told Diane Whitfield to call me the same hour she called you. My dad used to say the shop kept us alive, Lena said quietly. But I think what he really meant was that showing up for people is what keeps you alive. The shop was just where he happened to practice it. She looked up at Reed. I wasn't going to let 3 other people sit alone in their own version of what I went through, not when I had the number of somebody who could actually help. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm. Lena had almost forgotten existed mornings that started with actual customers. Instead of threats, afternoons spent under the hood of ordinary trucks with ordinary problems. Evenings that ended in genuine bone-deep tiredness instead of fear-soaked exhaustion. Jack still came by most Wednesdays, though the watchful tension had drained slowly out of his visits, replaced by something easier. Something that looked more and more like simple friendship between 2 people who'd been through a war together and come out the other side. You ever think about what you'll do with the extra space? Jack asked one afternoon, nodding toward the back corner of the shop that had sat mostly empty since Danny Ruiz left for Bozeman all those months ago. Business is picking back up. Words traveled about what happened here. You're going to need more hands eventually. Lena considered it, wiping grease from her fingers with an old rag. I've been thinking about that, actually. Not just hiring somebody. I've been thinking about starting something bigger. Bigger how? A fund, she said slowly. The idea still forming, even as she spoke it aloud. The way ideas sometimes do when you trust the person listening enough to think out loud. Something for small business owners who get targeted the way I did, the way Diane did, the way those other folks did. Legal resources, emergency funding, to keep the lights on while a case like mine gets built, maybe even, I don't know, a network. People who know what it looks like when this is happening. So nobody else has to sit in the dark for 3 months thinking they're just having a run of bad luck. Jack looked at her for a long moment, something quietly proud moving across his weathered face. Your daddy's shop keeping people alive, he said, just a little bigger than one roof this time. Would you help me? Lena asked. You and the others. Not with money, I know that's not really the currency your world runs on, but with knowing, with showing up the way you all showed up for me, except maybe before it gets to 240 bikes in a gravel lot at midnight. Jack didn't answer right away, and when he did, his voice carried a weight Lena hadn't heard from him before, something almost solemn. Lena, I've ridden with men my whole life who talk about brotherhood, about loyalty, about showing up when it matters. Most of the time it means helping somebody move, or standing beside a casket, or riding in a fundraiser for some kid with cancer. He gestured around the shop at her, at the whole strange, violent, redemptive arc of the past several months. This is the kind of thing that actually changes how a whole county thinks about what people like us are for. Yeah, count me in. Count all of us in. Darned. The formal announcement came 3 months later on a bright, cold Saturday morning in the same gravel lot where trucks had once staged an assault and 240 motorcycles had once formed a wall against it. A small crowd had gathered Diane Whitfield, driven in from Bozeman, the family from the Livingston restaurant, a dozen riders including Jack standing near the back in his familiar vest, arms crossed, watching with quiet pride. Patricia Alvarez, who'd agreed to serve as the fund's legal advisor, and Mason Reed, who'd flown back specifically for the occasion, standing slightly apart in his careful professional way, though even he couldn't fully suppress the small, genuine smile on his face. Lena stood in front of a modest banner strung across the front of the shop. The Robert Carter Foundation, it read, for small business protection, and looked out at the small crowd that had gathered to witness something being built out of the wreckage of everything that had nearly been destroyed. My father built this shop with his own hands, she said, her voice carrying steady and clear across the lot. No microphone needed in the crisp morning air. He used to say that a good shop doesn't just fix what's broken, it figures out why it broke in the first place so it doesn't happen again. I think about that a lot, especially this past year. She looked toward Diane Whitfield, toward the family from Livingston, toward every face in that crowd who understood in their bones exactly what kind of quiet violence had brought them all together. What happened to me, what happened to all of us, wasn't bad luck. It was a system built by someone who counted on all of us being too isolated, too exhausted, too alone to fight back. This foundation exists so the next person that system tries to break isn't alone, not for one single day. The applause that followed was quiet, understated, exactly the kind of applause Lena imagined her father would have approved of. No theatrics, just genuine hard-earned respect from people who understood precisely what it had cost to arrive at this particular Saturday morning. Afterward, as the crowd slowly dispersed into the ordinary business of a Montana Saturday, Jack found Lena near the shop's front door, the same door that had been broken twice, repaired twice, and now stood solid and whole behind them both. Your daddy really would be proud, he said quietly, not just of the shop surviving, of what you built out of nearly losing it. I couldn't have done any of it without you, Lena said. Not the surviving part, not the building part. I want you to know that, Jack. Really know it, not just hear it as something people say. Jack was quiet for a moment, looking out at the highway, at the mountains beyond it, at the whole wide stretch of Montana that had nearly swallowed this shop and everything it stood for. You know what the patch on my back used to mean to people before they knew any better, he said finally. Fear, trouble, something to cross the street to avoid. He looked at her steadily. I spent 31 years riding with men who understood loyalty better than most folks understand their own families. And I spent most of that time watching the world assume the worst of us anyway. What happened here, this shop, this foundation, it's the first time in a long while I've watched that story get told a little more honestly. We don't fix broken systems, Lena. Nobody like me has that kind of power, not really. But we make sure they can't crush honest people while the actual fixing happens. That's all this ever was. That's all it needs to be. Lena felt her eyes fill not with the raw, panicked tears of the past several months, but with something quieter, steadier, something that felt for the first time in longer than she could remember, like peace rather than survival. That's enough, she said. That's more than enough. Victor Hale's sentencing hearing took place on a gray Tuesday in late autumn, 7 months after his arrest in a federal courtroom, 200 miles from the shop he'd once tried to erase from existence. Lena drove there with Jack riding alongside in his truck rather than his bike. The season had turned cold enough that even he admitted a truck made more sense, and Reed met them outside the courthouse, along with Diane Whitfield and the Livingston family. All of them gathered to witness the final chapter of a story that had started for each of them separately as what felt like an isolated, incomprehensible catastrophe. Inside, Victor Hale sat at the defense table looking smaller than Lena remembered him, not physically, but in some essential way. The confident, untouchable posture of the man who'd once offered her $600,000 with a smile that never reached his eyes had been replaced by something gray and diminished, a man finally fully reckoning with the scope of what his 15 years of quiet cruelty had actually cost. The prosecutor read the plea agreement aloud. Fraud, conspiracy, coercion across 4 separate business acquisitions, attempted kidnapping, tied to the final night at Carter's Auto Repair, and the judge, a stern, unhurried woman who'd clearly read every page of a very thick file, looked down at Victor Hale for a long moment before delivering a sentence that would keep him behind bars for the better part of 2 decades, along with a restitution order that would, over time, help rebuild what remained rebuildable of Diane Whitfield's hardware store and the Livingston family's restaurant. Victor didn't look at Lena as he was led out of the courtroom in restraints. He looked instead at nothing at all, his eyes fixed somewhere in the middle distance, and Lena realized watching him go that she'd expected this moment to feel triumphant, and instead it simply felt final quiet, complete the closing of a door rather than the winning of a war. Outside the courthouse, the small group that had gathered stood together in the cold autumn air. And Diane Whitfield, who Lena had come to know well over the past several months through the foundation's slow, steady work, reached over and squeezed her hand. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you," Diane said, "for telling me to call Agent Reed that first day. I know it doesn't undo 18 months of thinking I'd simply failed at running my own store. But it means something knowing now that I didn't fail at anything. Somebody did this to me deliberately, and now that somebody is going to answer for it." "You didn't fail," Lena said firmly. "None of us did. That's the whole point of everything we've built since." Reed approached as the group began to disperse toward their cars, his expression carrying the particular satisfaction of a case finally closed. "I've worked 11 years in financial crimes," he said. "I want you to know, Lena, this is the case I'll remember longest, not because it was the biggest dollar amount or the most complicated fraud I've ever untangled, because of what you did with it once you had the chance. Most victims want the case closed and want to move on understandably. You turned it into something that's already protecting 3 other people with more likely to come." "I had help," Lena said, glancing toward Jack, who stood a little apart watching the courthouse steps with the same quiet, watchful patience he'd shown from the very first Wednesday he'd rolled into her lot on that Harley over a year ago now. "I had a lot of help." The foundation grew slowly but steadily over the following year, not into some enormous headline-grabbing organization, but into something durable and real, the way Lena's father had always built things, without shortcuts, without flash, laying one solid piece down at a time. Patricia Alvarez recruited 2 other attorneys willing to take similar cases pro bono. Reed, even after officially closing the Hale case, stayed connected as an informal advisor, flagging patterns for the foundation's growing network whenever something crossed his desk that looked familiar. And Jack became something like the foundation's unofficial early warning system, riding out personally more than once when word reached him that some small business owner, 2 or 3 counties over, had started noticing the same quiet, deliberate strangulation Lena had once mistaken for bad luck. On the 1-year anniversary of the night 240 motorcycles had filled her father's gravel lot, Lena stood in the doorway of Carter's Auto Repair at closing time, watching the sun go down, orange and gold behind the mountains, and felt something settle inside her that she hadn't fully felt since before her father got sick. Not just safety, though, that was part of it, but something larger. Purpose. The particular, hard-won piece of a person who had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it deliberately, patiently into a shield for other people standing exactly where she'd once stood alone and terrified and certain the world had simply forgotten they existed. Jack pulled into the lot as he did most evenings now, killing his engine in the golden light, and walked over to stand beside her in the doorway, looking out at the same mountains, the same highway, the same land that had nearly been stolen out from under everything her father built. "You ever think about what would have happened," Lena asked quietly, "if you hadn't kept coming here every Wednesday? If you'd just been some stranger passing through?" Jack considered the question with the same unhurried seriousness he brought to everything. "I think you'd have found a way through it regardless," he said finally. "You're your father's daughter. Stubborn as bedrock, twice as solid. But I'm awful glad I didn't have to find out for certain. He glanced at her sideways. Some debts take a lifetime to repay properly. I got lucky enough that mine came due exactly when I still had the strength left to answer it. Lena smiled the first easy, unguarded smile she could remember in longer than she wanted to admit, and looked out one more time at the shop behind her, whole solid humming, quietly with the ordinary machinery of a life rebuilt rather than merely survived. Victor Hale sat in a federal prison 200 miles away and would sit there for the better part of 2 decades, his empire dismantled, his name synonymous now with exactly the kind of quiet corporate cruelty he'd once believed no one would ever trace back to him. Diane Whitfield had reopened her hardware store 6 months earlier, restitution money and sheer stubborn will, carrying her back onto her own feet. The Livingston family's restaurant reopened its doors that same spring, a framed photo of Robert Carter's shop hanging near the register, a quiet thank you neither Lena nor her father would ever have expected, but one that felt somehow exactly right. And Carter's Auto Repair still stood exactly where it always had, at the edge of a 2-lane highway in rural Montana, the same hand-painted sign hanging above the door, the C still slightly peeling, because Lena, like her father before her, had never once let anyone touch it up. Some things she had learned over the hardest year of her entire life were never meant to be erased. They were only ever meant to be protected fiercely by the people who understood exactly what they were worth. And Lena Carter, standing in the doorway of the shop that had raised her, buried her father, nearly destroyed her, and ultimately saved her, understood now completely and without a single shadow of doubt that some legacies simply refuse to disappear. No matter how many powerful men try to erase them, because the people who love them refuse to let them go.